Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of BRS, the Belgian Raiffeisen Foundation, I wish you all a warm welcome to this 6th edition of the Microfinance Lunch Break. For ADA, our Luxembourg partner, with 20 sessions gone, the Midi de la Microfinance in Luxembourg already has a long tradition. But with this 6th edition here in Brussels, these microfinance lunch breaks also are becoming a landmark in the Belgian financial and economical circles. The aim of our microfinance lunch breaks is to raise the awareness and to increase the interest for the challenging world of microfinance and microinsurance. Today, we go already through the 6th edition, and as a lot of you can state, there is an ever-increasing interest for the subject. As promised earlier, we will try and alternate the subject between microfinance and microinsurance. BRS is convinced that with ADA, Fabelfin, Assuralia, KBC and SERA, it has strong partners who are convinced of the important role microfinance and microinsurance plays and has to play in the future, and are willing to support this initiative very actively. I especially would like to thank KBC for their support and generous hospitality for our lunch breaks. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming for the first time Mr. Thomas Leijzen, the new chairman of the board of directors of KBC Group, who, in line with Mr. Jan Huigebaert, who you all know, his predecessor, cordially supports this initiative and accepted to make some closing remarks. Mr. Leijzen, we really appreciate your presence and support. We kicked off the first edition in February 2009 with Damien van Stauffenberg from Microrate, who dealt with the issue of the impact of the financial crisis on microfinance. And even today, this theme remains a topic of the moment. We went on with Eric Ecoué, with regulation in the microfinance sector, followed with the first theme on microinsurance by Craig Churchill, innovating risk-coping mechanisms. The edition in February 2011 was a direct hit. Jonathan Murdoch took us along for a journey in the world of the poor. He gave us an interesting and challenging insight in the portfolios of the poor, how the world's poor live on $2 a day. And in October last year, Mr. Malcolm Harper, a slightly provocative speaker, was our guest dealing with a daring subject entitled Investments and Subsidies, Matching the Funding of Microfinance? ? And so we are here again today with a new question. Governance for microfinance, the Co-Operative Benchmark? In microfinance, corporate governance is often stressed both as a major risk and as a field where improvements are required. In practice, however, these calls for action are rarely developed, and like many other sectors, microfinance lacks clear frameworks for analyzing how corporate governance is implemented and how it could be improved. Today's presentation will aim at clarifying these questions, contrasting the case of savings and credit cooperatives with other types of microfinance institutions. For sure, a very interesting debate at the start of the UN International Year of Cooperatives, and a challenge to be addressed by our honored speaker of today, Professor Marc Labie. As many of you know, Professor Labie is an authority in the domain of microfinance and the first Belgian speaker for our microfinance lunch break. Marc Labie is associate professor at the Warroquet Business School of the University of Mons, where he teaches organization studies and management. He is also visiting professor at the Solvay Business School and lecturing in the executive program Financial Institutions for Private Enterprise Development at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He's co-founder and co-director of the CERMI, the Center for European Research in Microfinance, based in Mons and Brussels. Professor Labie specializes in microfinance organizations. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Social Sciences and a PhD in Business Administration from the University of Mons. He also studied for brief periods at the Universidad de Salamanca, at the London School of Economics, as well as at Harvard University. And Mr. Labie has been working in Benin, Bolivia, Burkina Faso, Colombia, Indonesia, Kenya, Madagascar, Morocco, Mexico, Peru, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Professor Labie has co-authored numerous articles on microfinance, and his current research focuses on corporate governance issues in microfinance. In 2011, he has co-edited with Beatriz Armendariz the Handbook of Microfinance, published by World Scientific Publishing. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again we have a challenging subject and a renowned speaker. Professor Labie will now share his scientific and field experience while focusing on the impact of governance for microfinance and addressing the question if the cooperative approach might be the benchmark. Together with you all, I'm looking forward to a fascinating discussion about this matter. Professor Labie, the floor is yours.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, and dear students, because I've seen that some students came to listen to this speech, even though they have already had lectures on this. But I tried to make the lecture today a little bit different from the class so that there are some things to be gained. It's really a pleasure for me to be here because I've been knowing BRS for quite a few years. In fact, I've even spoken in this room some years ago for Sarah Foundation about non-profit in Belgium. And it's really a pleasure to be here because I do share very much the feeling that many of people around here have about trying to find the best way to organize economic relationship in a humanly meaning sense. And so this is really my pleasure to be here and to try to share with you a synthesis of the research we've been doing on this specific topic. So I'll try to be brief, which is not my highest quality on average. To try to present what we have to say so that we can go in discussion. Here you've got the two main references that I will be using for today's speech. One, and I have to pay tribute to her, is the whole PhD research of Anaïs Périlleux, who was one of my doctoral fellow and who finished her PhD last January. Well, not this January, January 2011. And she could not be here and do this with me because she's right now in a postdoc in the United States, but I mean, I will use part of her work for the presentation. The second source is, as it has been mentioned, we just published some month ago a Handbook of Microfinance, which tried to synthesize the research in microfinance in all the fields, and I did write with a colleague from the University of Agder in Norway, the chapter on governance. So this speech of today is also partly inspired by this presentation. So to go quick to the topic, corporate governance is often presented as a major issue in microfinance. In fact, it's always presented as a major issue in finance. It's always presented as a major issue for government. It's always presented as a major issue for everyone, for any type of organization. In microfinance, to give just some example, there is, as some of you know, the banana skin reports that has been done 4 times, but 3 mainly different ones, 2008, 9, and 11. And you have here every time how corporate governance was ranked in terms of risk for the industry. So in 2008, it was considered the second biggest risk for the industry, 2009, the 7th, every time on 29, 25, and in the late edition of 2011 as the 4th highest risk on 24. So it's obviously always part of the big league of the major risk for the industry. Nevertheless, and I won't spend time on this, if you want to, we can in the question time, there has been some crisis. My own PhD in 1998 was on studying a crisis, a very famous crisis in Colombia, which is named Corporasol Financial, and it was mainly a corporate governance crisis. So there has been different crises in different countries around this. It has been identified as a major risk, as a major problem. Nevertheless, not much is happening. And there has been a little bit of research. There's been a few supposed to be best practice paper published, but really when you look at the institution, they have not made a lot of effort, which is very weird in a field, microfinance, which has changed so tremendously over the last 20 years, because it's a field which has experienced tremendous growth, tremendous improvement in many of its process, And nevertheless, in terms of governance, not that much has happened really once you go beyond the words. Why? Of course, I don't pretend to have the answer to this, but some ideas. First, because there is a trade-off between short-term and long-term investment for any company when you have to make your choice. And really, corporate governance doesn't appear as a very sexy type of investment, to put it this way. It doesn't appear very attractive because if you do it well, you won't see that it was useful. You will actually only see that it was useful if you don't do it well, because then you get into trouble, and then you make it a big priority when it's already too late to make the relevant investment to avoid that it happens in the first place. So basically, you have no major incentive to do it forward, and once you get in front of it, you make a lot of speech, but it's almost too late to do what you could do in a gentle way. That's a major reason. The second reason is, of course, it put constraints on top management. And top management, like any one of us, don't like constraints. So they do all they can to get out of it, one way or another. I mean, beyond the words, as I always say, university pays me to say what I think is true, so I always say that. I may be wrong, but at least that's what I think. Last but not least, and it's more of a theoretical topic, because when you understand well, and that's what I will try to do with you today, when you understand well what is really corporate governance, specifically in this field, it's an extremely systemic field, and it has to be approached, studied, and understood in a systemic way. And unfortunately, all of our studies provide us with skills that allows us to make good analytical analysis, but we are not that good at thinking in a systemic way. And so, of course, because it requires a systemic type of approach, we tend to move away from it very rapidly. So, this being said, how do I define, with my colleague from Agder, with Roy Merslan, how did we decide to define corporate governance to write this chapter I was telling you about? We used the OECD definition that we slightly changed. And of course, if you want to understand the change and why the change, it's written in the book. So let's just go to the definition. The definition says, corporate governance is a system or a set of mechanisms by which an organization is directed and controlled in order to reach its mission and objectives. That's what we suggest. I don't intend to spend much time now on this. If you want to, feel free to ask about it, and I'd be happy to come back on it. Okay. If we say, and I just give you a definition, that it's something which is a system of mechanism that makes sure that the company is properly governed, controlled, directed, then you understand immediately that most of what is written on governance in academic literature and in business practice is wrongly set up. Why is it wrongly set up? Because most of the time, the major focus is just about the relationship between the board and the CEO. And saying, at the end, it's an agency theory, and we can go into different type of agency theories. There are a variety of academic details into this. But at the end, it's always the issue of saying, you have two players, the principal is the board, how it makes sure that the CEO are going to do what you expect them to do. And when you put up governance this way, and of course you can, as I put on the slide, you can add to this some other mechanism like market mechanism, like, I mean, it's been very fancy those last few days, auditing bureaus of all type. You can discuss about regulation, supervision from government in some case. I mean, trade unions pressure when it's relevant in terms of what type of organization you're studying. But I mean, at the end, it comes down to, did the board was able to make sure that the CEO did the right job? And I think that we should observe, and there are so many cases, not only in microfinance, but away from microfinance, that it's just not reasonable to think that corporate governance will be assured properly just by looking at corporate governance this way. It's just not working. And the reason why it's not working is because we don't adopt a systemic way. Okay. I decide for this speech, but of course we could do the same presentation explaining exactly the same thing about regulation from government, explaining the same thing about auditing bureaus, or explaining the same thing about market pressures. Okay? I did choose the board as one example because we have not much time, just to show you that if you focus on only one mechanism, you're just missing the point, which is the point I want to make. If you look at the example of the board, like you usually do in normal agency theory, what you are going to find that it's most of the time, it won't deliver what you expect from it. And it's not a question of the good guys and the bad guys, and I mean, it's always presented like a Western style, but that's beyond the point. The reason why it's not working most of the time, if you put all your governance stress on this sole mechanism, and I'm not saying it should not be part of it, but on the sole mechanism, is first that, and I put you some of the reason, there is a lack of debate and a follow-up on the issues on which there has been debate about the real mission of an organization. In microfinance, all institutions are there to make double bottom line, good financial result, improve the situation of their clients, and nevertheless have a good growth because there's such a large unmet demand. Then you look at it, and you see that there are many institutions who are not enough preoccupied about their clients, who are either too preoccupied about the social aspect or the business aspect of their business, and therefore are not perfectly on track of a double bottom line perspective. Exactly like many companies around the world, including Belgium, will tell you our first asset is our employees. We try to create value for shareholders, and at the same time, we want to be a citizen company and do everything perfectly well. And okay, you put this on a big frame in the entrance of a building, and what? And then after comes real life, and in real life there are plenty of trade-off to be done, choice to be made, and of course, it's not that obvious for people who are in charge to make choices that are going perfectly to match this. The board is a place where they should be discussed extensively, thought, criticized, and most of the time it's very superficial what is done at that level. Second issue, the misunderstanding between board members and management about the functions of each others, about who is supposed to be doing what, how it should be done, and how it should be assumed. I've had a chance to do a little bit of consulting a few times in my life in microfinance, major microfinance institution, I should say, on this issue. And just by doing, I won't develop the details, but just by spending a week, making interviews, organizing a 2-day seminars, then you put the people together and you discuss, and you find out that there is such a huge gap between what theory tells you, what people have in terms of expectation, and what is actually done, that once you just put this on the table, then you move away, and there is already there a lot of room for improvement. So that tells you, if you can do this type of progress in 1 week, tells you that there is a lot to be done. It doesn't tell you that you are brilliant, it tells you that there is a lot to be done, and that therefore, obviously you cannot rely on that system saying it's working perfectly well when just in 1 week you can improve it. Okay? Constitution of boards and nature of the commitment of board members. Typical issue, long debate, I won't go over it to keep us the time. And last but not least, and this I want to stress, if you say in an agency theory type of paradigm that you expect the boards to be the main mechanism that is going to control the CEO, who's controlling the boards? There is literature about how to control a board. There are many ways of making auto-assessment of boards. And once you present it to people, it's very easy to do. And there are many options, and it's perfectly feasible. But in most cases, just boards don't assess themselves. I still have to visit a microfinance institution who is actually doing board assessment before organizing a seminar on corporate governance. After that, they sometimes start, and sometimes they ask us to come for this. But, I mean, it's not the normal practice. Now, microfinance is not worse than anything else. You look at other type of industry, other type of companies, even in all countries, many boards are never assessed as a board, neither collectively nor individually. The only thing being the sanction from will the people be renamed or not renamed, and that's not the issue. That's not the issue. Okay, so this being said, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go a bit fast, but there's so many things I want to share with you. I have tried with this only example of boards, but do keep in mind that I could have done the same with audit bureau, with markets, with any of those single mechanisms. It's just an example. Going from the example that you should not rely on a single mechanism, here is the hypothesis that we try to defend. The hypothesis we try to defend is that because it is a system, you want to have a whole bunch of mechanisms interacting together and making sure that you get a good check and balance system. And that's what I'm going to show you now. I'm going to show you the general framework that we use and we've been using for over 10 years now in order to think about governance. And just after that, we'll come to the question mark and the question of the debate date is applying this to cooperative. What can we do? What can we see? And what are the questions we can ask? And this, of course, I have to pay a lot of tribute to Anaïs Périlleux because that last part is really a PhD. But of course, I also help her to get her PhD. So I guess I can use it to some extent. Okay, moving there. This is the general framework that we have to pay tribute to Professor Gérard Charot from the University of Bourgogne in Dijon. He wrote a paper, he's nothing and he's not interested in microfinance. I think the only papers he ever read about microfinance were mine that I sent him to get advice. He's not his field, he's working on normal business company in France, most of the time. And he's largely unknown out of France because as many French people, he only writes in French and he speaks in French and therefore I'm trying to be his international lobbyist. I go very fast on this because many of you have already seen this in any of the presentation that Oral Research Center is doing. We use this all the time. This is the framework that Gérard Charot has suggested to say when you want to understand governance as a system of mechanism, those are the major mechanisms that you may want to consider. And you are going to present them in two categories. The issue is knowing are they intentional or are they spontaneous? Which means intentional mechanisms are the mechanisms that have been created having corporate governance as part of their objective. Spontaneous mechanisms are mechanisms that have an implication in terms of corporate governance, even though they were not created with this objective. That's why they're called spontaneous from the point of view of governance. And specific and non-specific is a way to divide the mechanisms that are established for a specific company versus non-specific that are created either for all the companies or at least all the companies of a certain type. When you go over this, you are going to see, that's what I want to show you, is that you see here most of the literature and most what you've read about governance is here. With a little bit here, regulation, and a little bit here of financial market for a regular company, takeovers and everything. This is what you've heard about most of the time. And the idea in most of the literature of the agency is that this is those in charge of governance are there and a little bit of help from government, which is there giving the rule of the game, and those people here who are supposed to be the police officer of the game. If you don't play well, they come, they get you, meaning that they punish the bad players and they put order. That's more or less the general way it is presented. Well, when you apply a system like this, much larger and much more diversified, you see that not only you have this, but you have this very interesting area here, which is something which is extremely useful for many organizations, especially small organizations, especially non-profit organizations, especially cooperative organizations, and that are extremely performing system in some circumstances, and that are most of the time totally neglected when you talk about corporate governance. So there is a lot of literature, for example, about corporate culture. Well, to take an example, corporate identity, you take the word you want, doesn't matter to me. But nevertheless, very little about corporate culture and governance. To which extent the corporate culture you have in your company will actually influence the governance of your company. There is very little on it. And so, applying, I'd be happy to come back if you want after, but I want to make sure that you have your time for questions. So I just move forward out of this, and I show you an example, and that's the cooperative benchmark. I show you, you take this general framework, and you try to understand what happened for cooperative, and you get basically this. Or at least we suggest that you get basically this. Of course, it's open to discussion, debate, and can be criticized, obviously. And so, it's exactly the same framework as previously, just we've done different type of research, we have analyzed cases, and we come up with saying, okay, if you want to understand cooperatives from a systemic point of view of governance, you basically come up with this in microfinance. Of course, here I'm talking about, yes, I should it's obvious, but I'm talking about microfinance cooperative. I don't pretend to make presentation for any type of cooperative in any type of sender. I'm talking, of course, of microfinance here. Okay, which button? Yeah. So you find, of course, you find that there are issues of boards. Board of directors, you should not call them directors, they're called different type of names, depending, but there are boards. There are boards with people elected who are supposed to are in charge of the organization. There are also incentive mechanisms of different types. Incentives for people who are members to get involved in the controlling. What type of advantage do they get when they are members of some institution? For themselves, for their children. There are different issues in many of those microfinance cooperatives, and therefore it may have an influence. There are, of course, the bylaws. Also a very important aspect that is very often neglected and that plays a key role in microfinance, the management information system. The way you design, the way you structure, and the quality of your management information system is fundamental. Why? Very simple to understand. A small cooperative starts with people who are highly motivated, local, the standard example, village people, they get together, they organize themselves, and so on and so forth. Most of them, of course, have no specific knowledge in accounting, legal issues, and all these things. So at some point, of course, it's going to grow. They're going to have employees with more skills than the original members and the original representative. And they will have, because the portfolio is growing, because there is a diversification of product, they will have to standardize a little bit the information. Well, it should be no surprise, I imagine, for people in this room, the way you standardize information, the way the information circulates, who is in charge of the information, who's going to get access to the information, what is the quality of the information, plays a huge role in making sure that an organization is on the right track. I mean, you're going to get an objective if already you are following an objective. How could you follow an objective if your MIS is not planned to give you information about that objective, for instance? And so it plays a huge role, and of course it is very often weak. Organizational structure, here I'm talking about another issue which is very interesting with the growth of cooperative. When you start and you have, like any small association, like any family business, I mean, you have a very tiny group of people, they get together, information circulates very easily, they all understand what this is about, what this company is about. Well, it works automatically. It's just automatic connection that makes it happen. Then you start growing. Okay, you start growing, remaining in the village, you still know who are the people you can trust, you know the people you cannot trust, you understand what type of business makes sense, what type of business doesn't make sense. Now you're starting to grow much further than that, and you associate with the next village, and the next village, and then the next region. Of course, you cannot stay like this. It's extremely difficult, we can discuss this also, but you cannot remain totally flat. Naturally, your structure is going to become more complex to a certain extent. And you create fédération, confédération, however you want to call them, that will basically structure the process. The more you structure all this process, the more those mechanisms that were very strong and very performing at the beginning of the process, the more those ones will become weaker. And the more you will need to rely on something different. Like this, like this, like this. And the more this issue is becoming key. I mean, after all, I'm sure you are all members, as I am, of very tiny association in Belgium, because we're in Belgium, I say take this example, where the board is meeting just once in a while, just because they want to match the legal requirements, so they meet twice a year because once is not enough, and you make the General Assembly. And that doesn't mean that those organizations are bad. I mean, if you have a small, I don't know, small local football clubs for your kid or whatever, I mean, the people are highly dedicated. They know why they are in business. They know what they are for. They know what is the value of a euro, what is the value of a ball, and if we can allow ourselves to pay for this or this, for a car or for whatever. And so there is no problem. This organization is perfectly governed and controlled by relationship network, by what we could call, even if there are non-paid people in this case, managers' mutual control, meaning a balance, a check and balance between different type of managers, a key to success, and very little on this, really. It's just making sure that the law is fine. And most of the time, the regulators and supervising body at government are no fool of this. They understand perfectly that these type of structure are not governed by this, and they will accept it just fine because it makes sense. The problem is that when you start growing, when you become more complex, when things are changing, at some point, this is going to be weak, but are we sure that this is stronger and this is appropriate by that time? That's the whole issue, and that's a systemic issue. If you only think from your point of view of each of those, of course, you're going to have a problem. You have to think it globally, and that's, of course, that is not an easy issue. Of course, in microfinance, as you would easily imagine, what are usually considered market mechanisms don't play a major role on the governance, even though, I mean, here it's a simplified version. We have not. There can be a discussion about the labor market in some institutions, because some cooperative, by their ability to be able to recruit good local people or not good local people, may actually have signal on their quality. So you could argue that at a certain extent, a local labor market may actually provide signal on governance at a local level. But okay, that's more for refining and for debate. And credit markets, of course, that depends if you're looking at a microfinance cooperative that is auto-financing itself out of its savings, or, as it is more and more often the case today, at cooperative that, even though they are collecting quite a bit of savings, are nevertheless getting quite a bit of credit from outsiders, and therefore are submit to the supervision of the banks or the type of institution that provide them credits. So, without going in all the details of this, and of course, all the papers, I think all the papers of Anaïs, you can download for free. I mean, there are a few ones. Kurt and the people from BRS were gentle to provide in your binder. There are a few papers that are reproduced. But if you want to see her papers, you can easily download them either from the website of the ULB or from the website of the UMONS. All the papers are published and they're working papers there. May not, sorry about that, may not be the final version, but you get the idea. So you can go in all the details, but at least you have the overview. Almost there. When you apply this type of framework, and you try to look at the problem that cooperatives have, and what I show you here is what a systemic vision can help you identify and can help you treating. You can say, okay, we have different type of conflict of interest. And the frequent, the major conflict of interest that you find in a microfinance co-op are usually those ones. There are the traditional conflict between net savers and net borrowers. This has been quite been studied, especially by the Canadian. There are the issue, much less studied, about between the member owners and the managers, between elected members and other members, almost not studied really, and between volunteer and salaried staff. All those conflicts usually are present to a certain extent in microfinance institutions. And all those conflicts have the ability to be the original, the original grain, the original seed for major problem. And the issue of governance is knowing if you have, with all your set of mechanisms, the ability to make sure that you keep all this under balance. Of course, this is just for the standard problem. But then there is an additional issue which has to do with the issue of growth that I was describing to you a minute ago. That things change as there is growth. And as you know, it's something which is a big dilemma in microfinance. In microfinance, if you build a nice, small, efficient institution, and you design good products at a good price, you're going to get a lot of customers. And you're going to get a lot of outside support. And you get a lot of access to markets, credit markets. Therefore, you are able to have an extensive growth. And some institutions have had to manage quite extreme type of growth. And then, in the case of cooperative, on the topics of governance that I was discussing today, you'll find major issue, membership evolution. Who should be the members? I remember a research we did with SOS Fin, which is a major NGO in Belgium on the field of microfinance. And they had a project in Peru where there were coffee makers, coffee growers. And they had created their small cooperatives for financing. So they had their business cooperative, and they create a financing cooperative. And the issue they had was the following. If we remain the size we are too small. We are too small to cover cost. Besides, as you probably know, when you plant seeds of coffee, when you start coffee, you have to wait for 7 years before you actually are getting anything out of it. And of course, like any agriculture production, if all your producers are doing the same thing, they have the same cash flow cycle. So you have an issue there. So too small, same cash flow cycle, too long expectation to get cash flow starting, an issue there. How do you do? Well, you can have different strategy choice. Either you say, okay, I remain in the same region, that's what's going to give me my currents, but I have to open to other type of producer, other type of clients. Or you say, no, we really want to stay with the coffee growers because coffee beans is really what we are about, and therefore we have to move geographically and different altitude because coffee is changing depending on altitudes, so that we can a little bit manage the cycle cash flow. So these are the type of issues that it looks like nothing, but it plays a major role in the way you are going to evolve as a cooperative. Same about who should be in charge. Always hard. You bring very qualified young graduate, usually, and you bring them in front of people who have created those cooperative when nothing was existing. So these guys took a village where nothing was existing. They built a small savings and credit cooperative that has been working just fine during 15 years. And then you young graduates, don't take it bad, my own students, I'm talking for the other ones. You come and you say, hey, no, I'm going to tell you how you should do. Well, that is not an easy business. Okay, so I think I'm almost where I wanted to be. And this is my almost final slide. So what I try to do, and in half an hour, it's not easy to cover it all, so I try to make as brief as I could. I try to show you, first, that corporate governance is very often wrongly defined. That if you define it properly, you have to adopt a systemic approach. If you adopt a systemic approach, you have to reject the traditional agency theory as the theory that is supposed to be helping you for this type of thinking. I'm not saying it's not useful. We all do study this in class and extensively. Of course it matters, but you cannot just look at this and think that it is explaining everything. And if you say it's not explaining everything and we need to adopt a systemic approach, then you have to come to the following issue. When you look at an institution, cooperative, as in the case of today, or non-cooperative, as an MFI, you have to understand what are the key mechanisms for that type of MFI at that type of his life. That's what I was saying. Then, once you have understood this, you have to establish clear expectation for each of them. And when I say clear expectation, I mean based on real life expectation. What I try to share with you is that very often what is expected from boards is just overrated. It's just overvalued. I mean, they cannot deliver, because the way it works, they cannot deliver what is expected from them. So you can't do like if you were thinking that they will do this, then you get into trouble and then you blame them. But the real issue was to understand what they could really provide in the first place, make sure that they do provide what they can provide, and then look for what other type of mechanism will make sure that you have a cross and check and balance system of power in your organization to make sure everything works well. And that's basically what is on the rest of this slide. Of course, I understand perfectly well that saying this may look very ambitious or unrealistic, and that's why I say here, okay, it's not because this is much easier to say this than to do it that we should not do it, or at least try to do it, because so far we haven't really tried enough. And that's probably the reason why we have so many crises in so many fields, is because our organizations are much too weak on the corporate governance issue. And right now, corporate governance is becoming a buzzword no one trusts anymore. The reason why is because it was wrongly presented, wrongly implemented, and it needs a deep and profound rethinking. Thank you for your attention, and of course I'd be happy to take the question.
I have a question on how could donors or the microfinance community support. My question is on under what type of shape do you think this support could be most efficient? Should it be by working groups from donors, such as what is being done on social performance? Should it be delegated to local associations? Should it be coming from the regulator? What is your experience and opinion on that, please?
I don't know. Well, I mean, when I say I don't know, it's that who am I to say that this should be the political priority that will get you the best use of it? I give you, what I will do, it's not a way to, I don't like to say something which I don't believe. So, and when I don't know, I'd rather say I don't know. So I don't know. But a few examples of things that I've seen and that could go in the right direction from my point of view. Once I was hired by a donor, let's just say, because in an organization, in a major MFI, that was going just fine, people had detected, being on the board, that there was an issue there, that there was something that it was important to look at it. And I did do some, let's say, consulting work, let's call it this way, but the consulting work was really about interviewing people to understand what was going on, and then organizing a seminar with the people from the board, the executive people, and the major stakeholders around it. That's what it was. And that experience convinced me that it is useful. So I'm not saying that the EU should pay for that and organize this, but let's give an example with rating. The rating in microfinance got a big jump because at some point some major donor decided that there was a line to help supporting partly the financing of it. So maybe there is some thinking about this, and I'm not looking for a job. Immediately I'm full. Okay, but the point is that nevertheless, I think it's something that is certainly worth trying. I think also that, and that's a major issue, many organizations in microfinance, and that's probably what the donors should do, and they have improved on this. Let's be honest, they have improved on this. But nevertheless, still, donors should coordinate themselves better. Because, for example, when donors do ask information in so different format that in real life microfinance institutions have 3 or 4 sets of accounting plus the one they actually use to manage the company, that's certainly not what I would call efficient solution. And this comes from the pressure of donors who want the information set up in a way that match what they want and what they need and their framework of analysis. So I think to a certain extent, there is probably a lot to be gained just in terms of incentive by reducing the room for maneuver, just if donors were coordinating themselves better on what type of the quality of information. There's a lot of issue, for example, when you talk about the quality of the portfolio, there's been a lot of work that has been done, and it has to be, I mean, you had Damien van Stoffenberg open the series. Okay, Damien has been doing some job with others, with IDB, and there was someone else, Planet, I believe, or Ada. I don't remember exactly who did this, but at some point they got together and tried to make some work in coordinating a little bit the indicators that could be used in order to standardize a little bit the thing. And there has been other initiatives done by the CEEP network, for example, in this, and that has helped. I think it helps. So I think very practical issues are about, that can be done, is about MIS, is about standardization of information, is about having the internal organization making an effort about this. And I don't think that there is only one way of doing it, because I'm not sure, as I told you, in some case, the problem with this, and that's why I say I don't know when you ask at the beginning, the problem with this is that it's not a standard issue. That's the problem. It's not a standard issue. If you are working in a small NGO that is in reality managed like a small family business, and this is the case of very many NGOs. Many NGOs are just managed as a small family business. Well, family business have a lot of strengths and some weaknesses, but the strengths of family business are usually not the board. So if you are working with this type of organization and you want to improve governance and you want to strengthen them, playing by the board this is just facade work. I mean, this is beyond the point. That's not the issue. But of course, if you're talking about an organization, another NGO, who has been developing in what we could call non-profit or for-profit, that's beyond the debate here. But between what we could call a company, with a real separation of responsibility, with a real interaction and a board that is really not doing what it should be doing in terms of control of the executive part, and you have a very big risk of entrenchment of the executive, and therefore taking a chance that thing goes wrong. Of course, in this case, working with the board makes sense. Same with regulation and supervision. There is a lot of work that has been done, and there's a lot of improvement on this from the donor community worldwide. It should be recognized. A lot of have been done in supporting superintendencies in different places. I'm a strong believer in the fact that superintendencies should be better equipped, better trained, better supported. It's not the problem now is that this is providing money to civil servant, top civil servant in developing countries. So when you are in your international institution, of course not yours, let's say another one, okay? In any institution, saying that you want to give money to support what is basically a ministry, people don't like this. It's not at all in the shape of what we think we should do. But having those people there qualified, well-equipped to think the environment in which they live is probably one of the best investment you can do. So I would say giving a lot of line of training for these people, giving seminars for those people, giving chance for them to interact with reality makes a lot of difference. I remember working in Madagascar and having had a chance to do a little bit of this work. Okay, and then you get to a very simple issue, which is you have a huge country. How are your people going to move around? Okay? And so I would say in this case, if you want to make a big improvement, buy their motorcycle, okay, which is not exactly the type of answer that you were expecting. Okay, so that's the point. I think it's a one-by-one case. I think it's a major issue, and once you want to support a certain type of institution, you have to understand for that type of institution, what is the more relevant. So I strongly believe that all I've been telling you here is fundamental. In fact, I believe I would rank it much higher than it is by the banana skin, because microfinance has developed tremendously over the last 20 or 30 years. Basically, roughly speaking, times 7, times 8 as type of growth. And we need probably to grow it by roughly the same, to give another idea. We don't know, of course we don't know, but let's say same type of growth. Now, this is a huge type of growth. The problem is not that we don't have enough players in microfinance. The problem is that microfinance is a field where you have many players, but among those very many players, you just have a few superstars. And you need to have more superstars. So you have to take the average guy and make it be a superstar. And that's what we have to play. And that means in some cases supporting MIS and sometimes the board and so on and so forth. So sorry, it's not an answer, but quite a long non-answer. Okay.
We have had so much growth over the years. And as far as I can see, your approach is systematic and is good, and I understand it. But do we have enough board members who have been educated? Because my feeling is that normally you have an approach for the staff and for how they work and so on, and you will talk from time to time to board members, but to have the quality board members, that's what I missed in your approach. They have not grown with the whole organization. They have been behind, and there has been very little possibilities for them to go abroad or have their training somewhere else or whatever. I think the main issue at the moment is that the board members have not gained enough level to be a board member for the organization that has grown so much. Maybe you can comment on that. Thank you.
Two comments. One where I agree with you, the other where I don't, on the idea that this is the key factor. Where I do agree with you, and this is very similar to what I was saying about the superintendency staff. Yes, I do think that one type of initiative that can be taken is certainly about training board members. But when we say training, to a lot of there is some training like reading the financial statement and stuff like that, of course. And so there is a lot of training to be done about this. Now, nevertheless, and this is just to come back to my systemic vision of the topic, which company do you want me to quote in Belgium that has had major problem recently and that had a great board with people perfectly trained? I mean, who are we talking about? I mean, we live in a country where most companies, many major companies got into trouble, and they had very famous, okay, let's take an example voluntarily out of this room and out of all of the thing. Okay, let's take Fortis. Okay, let's just take Fortis, just for the sake of the example. A good Belgium example. I mean, you look at the people who were at Fortis. Before the crisis happened, no one would have doubted the quality of the Fortis board. No one would have doubted the high quality of these people there. And I personally don't doubt the quality of the person there in terms of persons, to tell you the truth. And I have a certain amount of respect for the individuals there. That's beyond the point. And they certainly know how to read accounts, supposed to be. But the point is that once you don't have this discussion about how the board is supposed to function, who should be the member? And when I say who, I'm not talking about a person. I'm talking about what type of profile they should have. After Fortis went down, everyone say, oh, okay. But none of the board members there had all the financial skill to understand the type of complex derivative product that were being used, and so on and so forth. That's exactly what I'm saying. So the issue is that I agree with you. I think it's always a good idea to train the board, and it's always a good idea that the board you have understand your company. I remember some work being done on a NGO in Colombia, doesn't matter, but a big one. And I was doing some job with the board. And in the report I wrote, I was mentioning that part of the board members which were very respectful, nice, and intellectually brilliant people. Okay, so don't get the idea that I am disrespecting those people. That's not at all what I'm doing. But nevertheless, they had absolutely no idea of what were the products of this company and how you assess that product, how you price that product, and so on and so forth. Why? Because they had been attracted to this board to bring their prestige. And because this company was doing a nice thing, and because these were very nice gentlemen, they say, okay, I bring my prestige. Okay, once the prestige is there, who is going to control the CEO, the chief financial executive, if a product? And in that company, and it's an interesting case I want to share with you. It's been published, and by the way, it's even public. It's Actuar Family Empresas in Medellin. So that's one of the very few cases, and I do thank them all the time because they allowed me to share this with people. Because most of the time you do this work and then they say, okay, confidential. Okay, so that's the point. But they allowed to share it. So I'm really grateful to them for this. Okay, what was the situation of that company in a nutshell? In a nutshell, that company we were asked to make a diagnosis of the board. So we did. And we came up to say, you know what? Good news, you have a good governance. Let me go back to my slide just a minute. Okay. So the board, to put it simple, the board asked us to make a diagnosis. And we came back to them and we say, you know what? We have a good news and a bad news for you. The bad news is that, no, you cannot die, because the gentleman was old and he was preoccupied by this, what the company would become after that. No, you cannot die yet, because if you think that the board is going to make it just fine, no, your board is not working fine. But you want a good news? Your company is doing just fine. Why is your company doing just fine? It was an NGO, but run as a company. And we are talking, I can tell it now, we're talking about, the gentleman I'm talking about was the CEO, he's dead now. He was the CEO of one of the biggest company in the world that makes underwear. I forgot the name at the moment. But the top 4 company in the world for this. So I'm not talking, no joke here. And so, I hate modern world. Okay, and so when you look, we say, no, we didn't say don't you, excusez-moi. We said, you know what makes your company working well? A perfect balance between your 2 top managers, because the real CEO was a lady who had the mission in mind and was perfectly making sure that any decision would match with the social objective and how it should be limited and what it should be. But at the same time, she was smart enough to hire a financial executive, financial director, who was a pure financial director, making sure that everything would be perfectly at the right place. And so we told these people, the good news is your company is doing well. The bad news, it is based on the equilibrium of two people. For a company who has $5 million in assets and who has 200 employees, that's a little bit weak as a mechanism because people go away, people die, that is not what you can call a strong mechanism. So that is to answer to you. I really think we have to think about this topic in a systemic way. And when you play on a sole mechanism, you're just going to make an improvement somewhere. You have to have a check and balance. A little bit like in our democracy. And for cooperative, it's important. When do we say that a democracy, and I don't want to hear talk about our country in particular or any other country. When you think about a good democracy in comparison with a bad democracy or with a dictator, what is the real fundamental difference? The fundamental difference is not about the vote of the individual. That's not the difference. The fundamental difference is not about the quality of the legal. Most dictators in the world have perfect constitution. That's not the case. The real fundamental value of our democracy is a check and balance of power between different levels of powers. With a legislative body, with an executive body, with a judicial body, and with the free press that makes sure that everyone is controlling everyone and keeps I was about to say the boat on tracks, which is not a good idea, the train on the tracks. And that's what we need to do for corporate governance. We have to understand at each moment of time, for the type of organization we look at, what is the mix that we need, and we have to provide or help to provide or do the best we can to provide the support where it is needed to make sure that it works properly. And this without taboos and without preconceived impression on topic like incentive, for example.
So, dear Professor Labie, ladies and gentlemen, I just like to say that I was delighted to be able to attend here today for the first time this microfinance lunch break. As Frankie was saying, I'm very new in my job as chairman of KBC, so I'm still in a steep learning curve about the world of what I would call macrofinance. But so I was very happy today also to be able to deepen somewhat my understanding about the world of microfinance. And indeed, for me, microfinance is not a totally new concept. In my previous life as chairman of Umicore, we decided to invest in MFI, a microfinance institution, in Incofin, and so we have been able to experience some of the issues associated with microfinance. But I'm really happy that through this new job as chairman of KBC and the KBC's association with SERA and with BRS and with initiatives as KBC for BRS, I will be able to learn more and be more exposed to this powerful concept and powerful practice of microfinance. As far as the topic of today is concerned, I think it was particularly relevant for me, as Professor Labie said, corporate governance is an issue for all types of institutions. It's something that obviously we are in a bank also wrestling with, and we're trying to improve as we gradually try to turn also this institution again into a superstar, as you said. We have had issues to deal with, and we have issues to deal with, and corporate governance will be certainly one of the important aspects in turning this organization again into, hopefully one day, something that is really regarded as a superstar in the world of finance, and the superstar not only in terms of value creation and of financial performance, but also in regaining the societal respect that banks and financial institutions in the broader sense, and KBC as a banking and insurance company needs to regain. So from that point of view, the topic was clearly relevant. The angle of bringing in the cooperative framework, the cooperative benchmark, is again very relevant for me and for KBC, as you know, that we have this unique model of associating a public ownership with a large indirect cooperative shareholdership. So the concepts of that you have presented, the framework that you have presented, are certainly something that will be able to give me food for thought in the coming months and years as we're trying to deal with a number of these issues. So let me just say in concluding that, as far as I'm concerned, this presentation was both enlightening and very relevant, and I can only express the hope and the conviction that it was relevant and enlightening to all of you. Thank you very much, and I look forward to many more microfinance lunch breaks. I'm glad that we as KBC can be able to be a partner to this initiative, that we can host this, that we can bring this fairly broad microfinance community that exists here in Brussels, that we can bring it together from time to time and exchange and learn and gradually allow us to all improve the functioning that we all strive for. Thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to have the opportunity to share some more words with many of you. Thank you very much.